everything revolves around the law of one, because the law of one is the axis point upon which all things turn. All things go back to the law of one, that is the source and the origin of everything. This means that we are literally inside of God. So in this very same way, God did not create the universe, but rather the universe is made up of God. Nothing escapes the all-seeing eye of the Creator. Everything you do, everything you think, everything you feel is recorded in space-time. The universe is a system of perfect balance. So here's the question. Why do we draw experiences to ourselves that reflect our imbalances? And the simple answer is so this week, I want to connect some of these dots for you. Since we've been talking about these two topics heavily over the last few weeks here in 40U, I think we're all primed to see a really amazing connection between these two concepts, catalyst and spiritual balancing. So let's get into it. In our lecture on spiritual balancing a few weeks ago, we talked about the three principles on which spiritual balancing rests. And the first one was the law of one itself. We talked about how everything revolves around the law of one. So if we want to understand any spiritual principle or teaching, then our best bet is to always consider that principle in relationship to the law of one. How does this idea relate to the law of one? Because the law of one is the axis point upon which all things turn. All things go back to the law of one, that is the source and the origin of everything, every function in reality. So the one infinite creator, God, source, is law. God is law. God does not have laws. The source did not create a set of arbitrary laws when God made the universe. It wasn't like God said, okay, I'm going to make this universe, so let me think of some rules for the universe. What should those rules be? First rule, let's make it so that everything is one. Yes, I like that idea. Let's make it so that all things are really one thing, pretending to be multiple things. That's a cool rule. Yeah, well, we'll call that the law of one. Second rule, it's going to function on balance. Yeah, everything will have to be balanced. I like that rule. And then what's a good third rule for the universe? Something like what you think about, you attract. That's a fun one. Okay, so we've got these three rules. Let's create a universe from them. As silly as that sounds, that is kind of the way that the conceptual mind, the egoic intellect, conceives of how the universe was made through these laws. It's like there was God, and then there was God's laws that God made up. But I want to break that down for you because the very opposite is the case. Ramana Maharshi, for example, was famous for teaching his devotees that the universe is uncreated. And this was a tough one for them to understand. He would say it, again and again, and they would say, but Ramana, what does that mean, uncreated? Here it is. Clearly someone created it. And Ramana would say, nope, it's all uncreated. So that is the case that it's not that there's two things, is what Ramana is pointing to. Like a creator and then creation. Like two separate things happening together. Ramana said that creation is the self. Creation is God, right? They're not two separate things. And that's also why A Course in Miracles says, the world that you perceive, God did not create that world. Whenever you see the world as something other than God in any way, you've imagined a world that doesn't exist. You have to see reality, the universe, as God appearing, the manifestation of God's mind. The Buddha said in the Diamond Sutra, no beginning is the highest truth. No beginning is the highest truth. This means that we are literally inside of God, like a blood cell is inside of your body. And so you can imagine if one of your blood cells thought, wow, I'm inside of this great universal body. I wonder who the creator of this universal body is, who made up all these rules. I wonder if the body made up that health would be based on harmony and that all the systems of the body function together. I wonder when that rule was made up by the body. If a blood cell was thinking that way, we would say, well, that blood cell's got it all wrong, right? I didn't make up these rules. The rules that govern my body are an extension of my being, right? The rules, the laws that govern my body and my health are me. I am one undivided self. I didn't invent these rules. My body just functions based on my essence. I am the whole body. And so, like Jesus said, if the hand says to the foot, I have no need of you, be cut off from me, be gone. The body can't function very well like that, right? Because it's all one. So the fact that you are one undivided entity who depends equally on every system of the body means that one of the laws of the body is oneness, relationship, interconnectivity. It's all connected, right? Very, very opposite to what Western medicine says and teaches, that all the systems of the body are separate from each other. And when one system has a problem, we just ignore the rest of the body. What does the rest of the dumb body have to do with this problem? Let's just look at this one area and try to suppress the symptoms happening in this one area, because it's all disconnected. It's not like they're related to each other. And that's how we have the fallacy of Western medicine. So the body is not separate, it is one, because you're one. You are that oneness. So God is the law, and we can't overstress this enough. It's not that God has laws, or God functions by laws, or God made up some laws. God is law. And that law we can call the law of one. So in this very same way, God did not create the universe in the sense of making something up that didn't previously exist. But rather, the universe is made up of God. It's the opposite of the way the mind conceives it. The law of one is not a made-up rule set by the Creator. It is the very essence of the Creator itself. And it cannot change from this law or be otherwise. God is the law, and the law is God. And that's why in the Essene translation of the Gospel of John, the Essene version of the Gospel of John, which I'm fully convinced the Pauline Gospel of John we have in the New Testament was copied from that one. We have fragments of the Essene Gospel of John from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Essene Gospel of John opens by saying, "In the beginning was the law, and the law was God, and the law was with God." And this is why the Essenes worshipped and revered the law above all else, because they understood that the law is God, and they're not two separate things. And in fact, some of you already know this, and others of you have probably heard me teaching on this more recently, but the original Jesus movement, the Nazarene movement, long before the word Christian was invented, they were called the followers of the way. These were the Nazarenes. They called themselves followers of the way. Nazarenes were the northern sect of Essenes from Nazar, the Nazar Essenes, Nazarenes, from the Qumran Desert, where Jesus was born and raised. And this is actually confirmed in tons of extra-biblical sources, first century historians, and it's confirmed multiple times in the book of Acts as well, that mentions this sect called the Way, the Nazarenes, the original followers of Jesus. And you can read in a book called the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, which was renamed in the 4th century to the Pseudo-Clementines. Some of you have probably heard of that. And you'll see that the full name of the Jesus movement, as they called it, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, was the Way of the Law. And they called themselves the Followers of the Way for short. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Acts of the Nazarenes, it's the way of the law, the way of the law. Over and over and over you see this phrase. Salvation is only attainable by the way of the law, following God's laws and living in perfect obedience to them. And so this was James, the brother of Jesus, who was the appointed successor of Jesus. This is what James also taught with the 12 disciples when the Jesus movement began. And then slowly Paul's Gentile gospel began opposing it. And there was this great schism between the way of the law and the way of salvation by confession, confessing Jesus. And the disciples and James were very upset by this false gospel and were very much in opposition to it. But we know that that one historically won out, and the Nazarenes were kind of erased from history for the most part. Thankfully, we still have many of their texts. But what's interesting is if you read the book of James in the Bible, which is a Nazarene text called the Epistle of James to the Apostles, it's been slightly edited into the version we have in the Bible today. But if you read the book of James in the Bible, the entire book is about following the way of the law, and that the righteous are rewarded for obeying the law, and that the wicked are punished. And Jesus came to teach this exact teaching. That's where James got it from, following the way of the law. And it's stated numerous times, even in the Gospels. So I was reading the Acts of the Nazarenes this past week and was really blown away by this amazing synchronicity, because they kind of dance around calling it the law of one. They say the law is one. They say the one law. And I'm like, man, they're so close to calling this the law of one. Like, I wonder if they ever used that exact terminology. And to my surprise, I was reading a excerpt from a book from a first century Nazarene, actually second century Nazarene, called Hegesippus, who was a famous first and second century historian. He's the most reliable historian that we have on the first century and the original Jesus movement. Many later historians quote Hegesippus, and from his writings, he wrote a 5-volume set of the history of the Nazarenes that got burned and canceled and deleted by the Roman Catholic Church. But we have excerpts from his book. It's called Memoirs, where he documented the entire history from the crucifixion of Jesus up until his day of how the Nazarene Church, the movement of the way of the law, was thriving in those days in the first century. So I'm going to read you this passage from the closing of the 5th volume that Eusebius quotes in the 3rd century. And this blew me away, and I think it probably will blow you away as well. It says, "And so, to reiterate, after James the Just," that's the brother of Jesus, "had suffered martyrdom, and on the same account again as had his brother Jesus also, Simeon, the son of Clopas, descended from Jesus' uncle, was made bishop, his election being promoted by all as being a kinsman of Jesus the Messiah. Therefore, up until that time was the assembly of the community called a virgin, for she was not as yet corrupted by the false and worthless teaching." And this is reference to Paul's gospel right here. And I'm going to do a whole teaching series on this later, so I won't belabor this point. But the false and worthless teaching is the Christianity we have today, ironically, salvation by confession. And then it ends by saying, "To the one unbegotten Lord Creator, the law of one. Amen." Pretty amazing, huh? There we have it, the law of one. The Lord Creator is the law of one. And this is from a Nazarene from the early 2nd century. So I just did a little side tangent there to show you that this is a very ancient teaching we're talking about, and it is the original Jesus movement. Jesus' gospel was the way of the law. And Jesus was asked multiple times, "Jesus, what is the greatest law of all?" The first time he said, essentially the golden rule, right? The greatest law is to whatever you would not want to suffer yourself, do not make another person suffer. Do unto your neighbor as you wish your neighbor to do unto you. And Jesus said, this one law summarizes the entire law and prophets of the Old Testament. In a later passage in Matthew, Jesus is asked again, what is the one greatest law? Jesus says, the law is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is the extension of that law, the way we demonstrate it. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And this is why Jesus says also in Matthew 7, not all who call me Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father in heaven. So sorry, Western Christianity, but Jesus was very explicit. Do not call me Lord and not do what I command. Away from me, you who practice wickedness, for you confess me with your mouth, but when I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was thirsty, you did not give me a drink. When I was in prison, you did not visit me. So Jesus says, not everyone who calls me Lord is going to automatically enter the kingdom of heaven, which is within you, the state of consciousness of the Christ, the inner reality. Not all who call me Lord will automatically enter the inner reality, but only those who do the will of my Father. So it's salvation by good works, service to others, which is the law of one, right? This is what Ra stresses. You can say all day long, I believe all the right things. I know God. I'm one with God. I know that I'm one with everyone. I'm good. I'm going to heaven. But then when somebody triggers you, how do you respond? When you have the chance to be selfish or selfless, which one do you choose? See, faith without works is dead, as James said. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you confess with your mouth. The mind is dualistic. The mind is deceitful. The mind will confess all kinds of flowery platitudes. Oh, I know this and I know that. But what you do in time-space shows what you really know, what you really believe, what your convictions really are. And Jesus was clear about this. They're two separate gospels. So what this means, and I would write this down if I were you, what this means is that there is always a consequence for violating the law of one, and there is always a reward for obeying it. Always and forever. There is always a consequence for violating the law of one, and there is always a reward for obeying it. And this, my friends, is our great impetus to live in perfect obedience to the law of one. Because by giving obedience, we receive blessing. What we give, we receive. So let's take this into the concept now of spiritual balancing. This is the law of balance, the law of one. Everything is built on perfect balance. The universe is a system of perfect balance. Everything in the universe is mathematically quantifiable, yeah? Everything in the universe can be quantified through mathematics and geometry, and there are no leftover remainders. Like when you do a math equation, like the answer is, 354 with a remainder of 2 or something like that. There are no remainders in the math of the universe. Everything equals out. Everything balances perfectly. And so because the universe is built on perfect balance, karma, as we say, is the great balance keeper. Karma can be described, actually, as any imbalanced perspective you hold. And maybe you want to write that one down too. Karma can be easily described and understood as any imbalanced perspective you hold. And this is the foundation for catalyst. Any imbalanced perspective you hold, meaning any violations of the law of one held in mind, must be balanced by the law of karma. That's why A Course in Miracles says, I am only responsible for what I hold in mind. So last week we touched on the process of catalyst and how every experience you have draws cosmic energy into your energy centers from the root. It's also called catalytic energy by Ra. Every experience draws catalytic energy up the root chakra and successively up the energy centers, based upon how blocked or unblocked you are. Last week we looked at those blockages in each energy center and how to raise the catalytic energy higher, because when we raise it all the way to the third eye, what does that mean? It means every experience gets processed all the way up to the third eye, the center of spiritual perception, and we experience everything as a manifestation of God. We perceive the divine element in every circumstance. That's how we know we've raised catalyst to the third eye, is we have a harmonious experience of balancing it. Survival, check. Personal desires, check. Personal will, check. Universal love, check. Universal wisdom, check. Spiritual awareness of the Creator, check. That's the 6 checkpoints of catalytic energy. So every catalyst has to go through all 6 of those, and it may get stuck in certain energy centers that are blocked. So here's the question. Why do we draw experiences to ourselves that reflect our imbalances? Why do we attract experiences that trigger our greatest fears and blockages? And the simple answer is because the universe is attempting to spiritually balance you. Do you see that? You're being spiritually balanced by the universe. It's the same exact practice we talked about a couple weeks ago. Whatever I'm in resistance to mentally, I actually have to go deeply into that perspective and contemplate it and put myself in those shoes and try to experience that perspective mentally. We talked about vegan versus carnivore, right? If vegans are very triggered by carnivores, then that vegan has to contemplate, what is it like to be a carnivore? Why would someone potentially see that as a valid diet that's good and healthy and righteous? Because clearly those carnivores do. No carnivore says, I just eat meat because I'm a soulless, animal-hating murderer. A vegan may have that perspective, which is an unbalanced perspective, and they may be triggered by carnivores all day until they say, look, I'm tired of being triggered by meat eaters. Let me just imagine and contemplate the mind of a meat eater and how they think and perceive about it. And after contemplating and having that experience of trying to sort of be a carnivore in your mind and go, okay, I see, I get it. I see how that can look correct from within that perspective. Then we take the charge out of it. So why does the universe bring to you those things you fear the most? Those things you're in resistance to the most? Because the universe needs you to experience the opposite perspective that you want, the perspective you fear and resist, so that having experienced it, you can overcome that fear and balance the perspective. So can we see the correlation between catalyst and spiritual balancing, that they're the same thing? That all your catalysts are the universe spiritually balancing you. Pretty amazing, isn't it? This is why, you've often heard me say, you will always attract what you resist until you stop resisting what you attract. The key here is we can balance these things mentally or experientially. We've been given this opportunity, right? We don't need to wait for the universe to bring us those things we fear in reality. We can actually take the onus on ourselves and begin contemplating our fears and our judgments, the things we resist, the things we hate and judge. We can mentally go into those perspectives and consider them and understand them from that perspective. And then we balance our karma. And now the law of karma doesn't need to bring me an experience that forces me to look at that perspective. Pretty amazing, right? So catalyst is the balancing act of the universe, because you're like a thought in the universal mind, right? You're like a thought in the mind of God, because God's mind is perfect, in perfect balance. God must always bring balance to any imbalanced perspective. So when you hold an imbalanced perspective, it's like part of God is holding an imbalanced perspective. And so God's mind, being perfect, has to bring balance to that imbalance. So you are one with God, right? All the thoughts you think are God's thoughts in that sense. Course in Miracles says, my mind is part of God's. I am very holy. The Course stresses this, right? And this is why we say you will always experience what you fear until you can love it and forgive it. Any imbalanced perspective you hold must cause you to draw to yourself that opposite perspective. So here's some points to remember from this whole message, because I just gave you a lot, but let's distill it. Number one, the universe is perfect harmony. Therefore, all disharmony is the universe attempting to alert you of where you are out of balance. More specifically, all disharmony that you experience in your life, any moment you feel disharmony happening, that is the universe trying to alert you of where you're out of balance. We said this a few weeks ago in the lecture on spiritual balancing, that to the fully balanced entity, the crystallized being, no experience can arise that triggers an imbalance, a feeling of imbalance, fear, anger, judgment, sadness. To the balanced entity, all experiences provoke love and compassion. If someone loses their mind, if someone starts screaming at you, you don't feel defensive or upset that they're screaming at you. Your immediate response is, oh my goodness, this soul is suffering. How can I be of service? What does love want me to do to help this being? That's the way we think and perceive when we're fully balanced. So all disharmony you experience in your mind is the universe trying to point out an imbalance. Once you know that, then you can say thank you for feelings of disharmony in the body. It's the emotional guidance system pointing out where your imbalances are. The second important point from this whole talk was that all violations of the law of one, which is the law of love, all violations of the law of love are punished just as all obedience is rewarded. Nothing escapes the all-seeing eye of the Creator. Everything you do, everything you think, everything you feel is recorded in space-time, and it is measured up to the standard of the law. So every thought you think is being measured up against the law of one, or the law of love. Love is perfect balance. Love is the state of being perfectly balanced because love honors and understands all perspectives. From the sinner to the saint and everything in between, love says, I understand, I forgive you. So love is balance, and spiritual balancing is the only practice that can bring us to fourth density consciousness. So if it does not measure up to the law of one, your thought, your deed, your action, then karma must bring you the appropriate punishment or correction, right? To the extent I violate the law of one must violate me, because you can't make the universe imbalanced. So karma literally means your own doing, right? You've done it to yourself because you are the universe. So you can't really attack somebody else. You always attack yourself, and you always bless yourself. So if my thought or action does measure up to the law of one, to love, then karma brings me the appropriate reward. And what are some of those rewards? Karma will always bring you the reward that reflects your level of obedience, or the way you're in obedience. It's very specific. So for example, giving to others who are in need brings abundance to me. Forgiving others for their misdeeds brings inner peace to my soul. I can forgive myself and love myself and transcend guilt. Compassion towards others brings grace and good favor to myself. Things just start to go my way. You know, even when a challenging circumstance arises, I notice a lot of good fortune in that circumstance. Things always work out in my favor. Why? Because I'm extending favor to others. I don't judge them for their misdeeds, and therefore the universe doesn't hold my misdeeds against me either. That's the reward, the karmic reward, right? Trust, surrender. Trust brings a happy, favorable outcome always. When I trust God and I know that God's will for me and everybody involved is good, and I hold fast to that trust, a happy outcome is guaranteed 100% of the time. It's a law, it can't be broken. So this is what Jesus really meant when he said, "For by thy works you shall be justified, and by thy works you shall be condemned." He's talking about karma. Every violation of the law brings punishment. Every obedience brings a blessing. There are some more impetus, to follow the law and spiritually balance ourselves. And so the third point I'm going to give you is more practical application, which is a powerful question you can start asking yourself when you are in the midst of a catalyst. This question will help you to remember that this catalyst is really the universal mind of God attempting to bring balance to my mind. So the question that will activate this for you is, what perspective is this catalyst asking me to balance? Or what perspective is this catalyst asking me to consider? Whatever's triggering me, whatever's causing resistance, that's a catalyst. What perspective is that catalyst asking me to consider? The universe is saying, hey, have you considered this? What is that perspective? You've got to figure that out. And you can only figure that out by contemplating it, by asking, right? Please, God, show me what this experience is asking me to consider, to balance, to contemplate. That's all we have to do. So this is the good news, right? We're not living under the Leviticus code or something where there's like 500 different laws we have to obey and follow. Jesus said, no, just one law. Just follow this one law and you will obey every other law and everything the prophets have ever uttered of God. You will obey all of it in this one law. There is only one royal law, the law of one, which is love. And so love is the law. And so all balancing is an act of love. Understanding is the mind's version of love, isn't it? So we want to come to love and understand all possible perspectives in the universe so that we can become so grounded in reality that no circumstance can ever arise that is triggering or causes us to judge or become defensive. That is our goal. And spiritual balancing is what takes us to that goal. If the law of one is the perfect law, then wouldn't following this perfect law be the perfect way to God? And can we really do anything other than love this perfect way once we see it? Isn't this the way that Jesus came to reveal? The perfect way to God is to follow God's one law of love God, love your neighbor. See, when you understand these metaphysical principles behind, catalyst and spiritual balancing, you come to love this practice, you guys. It's not a burden. It's not something you make yourself do. When you understand the implications of why we want to balance, because I want to live in perfect obedience to the law of one. Why? Because whenever I violate it, I violate myself. I punish myself when I violate the holy law of love. Nobody else is doing it to me. It's my own errant thinking I'm suffering from. There's no outside force that's punishing me. It's my own ignorance punishing me. When we know that, we want to live in obedience. And so we want to correct all of our disobedient thoughts. It's that simple. And so you begin to just kind of constantly put yourself in the shoes of other people. You tend to go right into the perspectives that you are in resistance to, in fear of, or triggered by. You no longer run away from perspectives that are off-putting, but you say, wow, there's a lot of heat in this one. Like, I really judge these people. I really feel judgment towards this thing, this ideology, this act, whatever it is. Let me go into that. I want to explore that deeply. What could cause somebody to do such a thing? What could cause somebody to believe this way? And you notice yourself leaning in to those perspectives. Isn't that quite a loving thing to do? Isn't love always a forward movement? Love never shrinks back and away. Love is always a forward movement. It says, let me understand. Let me accept. Let me see. Let me embrace. That's the way that love thinks and perceives. And so this is the only real way to reach fourth density consciousness. And that's why Ra gives us this practice in the law of one for our ultimate success in graduating to fourth density. It is through the cultivation of universal love. Once we're no longer triggered by the perspectives people hold, then we can see right through them and to that divine light within each person. And because we are following the perfect way, the way of love, the way of the law, then we can love that person perfectly, just as they are. So these are the only ways we can be enabled to be living, walking demonstrations of the law of one, of fourth density, is we have to become balanced. We have to become fully integrated, which means spend time contemplating everything you have resistance to until you understand it, until you can actually feel compassion for that perspective. And you know what's really cool about this practice, you guys? Is it's nowhere near as difficult as you might think. It's way harder to be forced to experience the things you resist in real time while you hold resistance, right? That's tough. That's not fun. When we go into those perspectives we fear and resist and we spend time contemplating them, we can find understanding pretty quickly. If you have any level of heart activation, it's not difficult. It doesn't take long. And so you may have to continue in that because the old programs may persist for a while. They may continue trying to trigger you. And so you say, no, I understand that perspective. And you go back to that understanding. When the vegan's triggered by the carnivore or whatever, as soon as that trigger happens, no, I'm not triggered by their perspective. I understand it. And you go back into it for a minute and you remember, oh yeah, that's right. They're just where they are. It looks true from their perspective. There's nothing to fight against here. Let's just find a mutual meeting place where we can understand each other. That becomes the aim. The more we stay in resistance, the more negatively charged we are, right? The more you move away from something that's positive, the more negatively polarized you become, and then vice versa for positive polarization. So these are the basic metaphysical laws we're working with. We can move towards everything with love and understanding and polarize to the positive. Or we can resist, judge, and resent things and move away from them, entrench ourselves more deeply in our bias, entrench ourselves more deeply in our judgment, and polarize to the negative. But there isn't a third option, my friends. Every single circumstance, every single perspective in the universe will force you in one of those two directions. You can only choose positive or negative, love or separation. There's no third state between love and separation. So from that understanding again, which the course does a fantastic job at constantly reminding us, hey, you're always choosing between unity and separation, between love and fear. You don't have another choice. Then we just start to make that choice by default, automatically, because our heart wants the perfect way and loves the perfect way and wants to be in obedience to the law of one. And when we let the heart run the show, we notice we're always balancing, always integrating, always forgiving, always being compassionate. Every perspective, we bring it into the heart and we forgive it and we understand it. It happens on its own, you guys, when the desire for heart-based consciousness is alive in you.